If you survived as a machine gunner in World War I, you were considered one of the lucky ones. But surviving meant living with what you did with that gun for the rest of your life. This is the story of the men who operated the deadliest weapon of the Great War, but who everyone on the battlefield was trying to kill. So, as we always do, let's go back to where it all actually began for machine guns. In the time of muskets and muzzle loaders, the first attempt at greater firepower was bunching several barrels together into what were called volley guns. But these were far from what you could call machine guns, since they fired a single volley and then had to be completely reloaded. But then came Richard Jordan Gatling with his, you guessed it right, Gatling gun. Now, although it wasn't quite a machine gun, it was the first thing that actually fired like one. It was purely mechanical, using a hand crank to rotate multiple barrels. And as they rotated, they went through positions of loading, firing, and extracting, all driven by that same mechanical motion. It was basically a very quick firing bolt action rifle, rather than a true machine gun. Armies were skeptical at first, but for the first time in history, a single soldier or a small team could deliver an incredible rate of fire. Major powers began equipping themselves with Gatling guns, but they were more like artillery. Big and clumsy, mounted on carriages, they were difficult to keep up with infantry in what was then considered mobile warfare. But then came Hiram Maxim, and he was about to turn military tactics upside down with his creation. Here's what he did. He realized that the energy wasted in that powerful kick could be harnessed for something revolutionary. Instead of letting all that recoil force go to waste, he could use it to automatically cycle the weapon's action, reloading and firing again without any human intervention. Rather than requiring an operator to provide the energy, his gun used the recoil force from each fired cartridge to automatically eject the spent casing, load the next round, close the breech, and do everything again for the next shot. All the operator needed to do was hold down the trigger. Between 1883 and 1885, Maxim patented gas, recoil, and blowback methods of operation, covering every possible variation and protecting his invention from imitators. And look at this. The prototype was designed and demonstrated in 1884, still a full year before the invention of smokeless powder. All of Maxim's early work was done with black powder cartridges, which produced massive fouling and smoke. That he achieved reliability under those conditions is genuinely impressive. He fired over 200,000 rounds through the prototype guns with minimal problems. The prototype could even be set to fire at any rate from 1 round per minute all the way up to 600 rounds per minute, using a unique hydraulic rate of fire control lever, like an accelerator pedal for the gun. Military trials demonstrated that a single Maxim equaled the firepower of 60 riflemen firing simultaneously. Unlike the Gatling's gravity-fed hoppers that were prone to jamming, Maxim's gun fed from 250-round fabric belts that could be linked together for extended fire. This was a major innovation that finally allowed truly sustained shooting. Continuous automatic fire generated tremendous heat that would quickly crack or deform a conventional barrel. So, Maxim solved this with a cylindrical brass or steel water jacket surrounding the barrel, holding about 1 gallon of water. During firing, the water absorbed the barrel heat and began to boil, with steam condensing through a hose into a separate canister. This prevented the gun's position from being revealed by rising steam clouds. With proper water supply, the Maxim could fire continuously for hours, though the water would begin evaporating noticeably after about 750 rounds. The complete Maxim system weighed about 117 pounds, including the gun, tripod mount, and water in the jacket. A crew of 4 to 6 men typically operated the weapon. You had a gunner, loader, and additional men to carry the gun, the ammo, water, and spare parts. While a single soldier could technically fire it, efficient operation demanded teamwork. It's also interesting to mention that there was a scaled-up version of the Maxim for 37mm rounds, which the British rejected. But the Boers of South Africa bought some of these and nicknamed it the pom-pom. When the conflict with the British began, the Boers basically used Britain's own weapon against them to horrific effect, hiding these guns near British artillery batteries and decimating quite a few. Not the topic of this video, but still interesting to mention as a side note. Okay, so at first armies were skeptical about adopting the weapon. Opinions ranged from it being useless for what was considered modern warfare, to being too costly because it spent too much ammo, to simply not understanding how it could even be used on a battlefield. But slowly but surely it gained interest, and the major powers began adopting it. Everyone felt something big was coming. However, no one could have even imagined how big it was going to really get, and just how deadly Maxim's creation was about to become. Now, the Maxim design spawned 3 major variants that would define the First World War. Germany's MG08 was chambered in the 7.92 by 57mm Mauser round. Britain's Vickers in the .303 British cartridge, which earned legendary status for reliability, like when it delivered sustained fire to deny Germans a certain area during one operation, firing for 12 hours straight. They used 100 barrels to fire nearly 1 million rounds without a single breakdown. The Vickers actually remained in British service until 1968, when it was ceremonially retired with a full military funeral. The Russians had their Tula Arms version, chambered in 7.62 by 54mm, with a distinctive two-wheeled cart and attached gun shield. And these variants are still seen every now and then in the Russo-Ukrainian War, deployed on both sides for some reason. But while everyone adopted the Maxim design, the French actually went with the air-cooled Hotchkiss, and for an interesting reason. There were initially tensions with Britain over territory in Africa, and the French army wanted something lighter than the Maxim. But more importantly, they didn't want a water-cooled system because they expected to fight in the desert where a steady water supply was impossible. The Hotchkiss had rings on its thick barrel that dissipated heat, and it could reach about 400 degrees Celsius without damage. At that point, the barrel would be literally glowing dark red. The Hotchkiss was actually gas-operated rather than recoil-operated like the Maxim. However, the biggest trade-off was its feeding system of 24-round strips compared to the Maxim's 250-round belt. The American Expeditionary Force actually used the Hotchkiss for quite some time when they entered the war, until they developed their own machine guns. So, going back to these new machine guns everyone now had, they still weren't tested in real combat. And everyone, no matter how sick this sounds, but we humans are quite a strange species, was excited to try them out on other people. First came the colonial bloodbaths, where the Maxim would begin its history written in blood. During the First Matabele War, about 700 men of the British South Africa Company's paramilitary force faced 5,000 to 6,000 Ndebele warriors. The column possessed 5 Maxim machine guns, and when the Matabele launched their surprise night attack, the Maxims opened fire. The effect was described as the warriors being mowed down like grass. Around 1,500 warriors were killed, while the British lost 4 men. 1 week later at Bembezi, 2,000 Matabele riflemen and 4,000 warriors attacked again. About 2,500 more were cut down by the Maxims. There were quite a few more such examples of what a few Maxim guns could do to a mass infantry attack. However, for some reason this was written off because they were fighting the less developed armies of colonial states. It was deemed that in what they called civilized European warfare, things wouldn't be like that. Even the Russo-Japanese War wasn't a strong enough warning for how the machine gun was making old charging tactics obsolete and incredibly costly. They still thought that fighting in Europe wasn't going to be like that. Spoiler alert, it is about to be much, much worse. When the guns of August 1914 opened fire, every major power expected everything would be over by Christmas. The generals planned for a short, decisive war of maneuver. Military doctrine remained wedded to the offensive, and pre-war theorists believed that victory would come not from superior tactics or even superior weaponry, but through superior will. And no one could even imagine just how wrong they were about to be, at the expense of millions of young soldiers' lives. You see, the technology of defensive warfare had advanced far beyond the technology of offensive warfare. Machine guns combined with rapid-firing artillery, when used with trenches and barbed wire, gave a decided advantage to the defense. When the Great War began, attacks were linear in nature and based on pre-war theories that didn't account for the machine gun. Each battalion advanced shoulder to shoulder with a screen of skirmishers out front. Once the main force made contact with the enemy, reserves were fed into the battle to fill gaps created by casualties. The advancing force was trying to suppress enemy fire and inflict enough casualties to make the opposition waver. Then, theoretically, a bayonet charge would deliver the final blow. And now, how do you think this looked like when a machine gun was on the other side of this mass of men bunched up together, advancing across open ground? The first months of war produced casualties on a scale that shocked everyone. In just the first couple of months as the Great War began, the warring sides collectively suffered over 3 million casualties. That quick, decisive war that would end by Christmas, as everyone talked about, couldn't have been further from the truth. Along with artillery, the machine guns had a huge part in this. The British Expeditionary Force arrived in France with just 2 Vickers machine guns per battalion. The Germans had 6 machine guns per regiment, or 1 for every 750 men. But by 1918, they would have 1 machine gun for every 50 men, while the British Army went from 2 guns per battalion to 36. After the Battle of the Marne in September 1914, where combined casualties approached 500,000, the German armies retreated to the Aisne River and dug in on the high ground. Both sides then attempted to outflank each other to the north in what became known as the Race to the Sea. But it wasn't a race at all. It was a series of overlapping engagements where each failed flanking movement pushed the front line further north until it reached the Belgian coast. By the end of November 1914, the war that many had expected to be swift and decisive had become a stalemate. An unbroken chain of trenches stretched from the Alps to the North Sea. About 25,000 miles of trenches were collectively built by all sides during the conflict. And soon, machine guns alongside artillery became the rulers of the battlefield. In some sections, there were over 30 machine guns per kilometer of the front. The primary reason the machine gun caused trench warfare was that the weapon was useful pretty much only for defense. They were heavy and crew served with 4 to 8 men working around the gun, so you couldn't quite